It is the Representation Station, and I am your host, Jeff Mayhew. I'm here with the No Cap Fun team, Roger Scott and Walter Clapp. Tonight on the show, we have a very special guest, Scott Howard. Before we get to Scott, Roger, Walter, why don't you introduce yourselves?
I'm Roger Scott. I'm a North Carolinian by birth and by choice. I'm a CPA here in North Carolina. I'm an angry citizen. I'm very unhappy with the way things have been going in this country for a few years now. And I choose to bring my unhappiness to this doorstep because these guys talk me down.
Walter?
And my name is Walter Clapp. I am the president here at the No Cap Fund. I'm born in Texas, raised all over the United States. Currently, I reside in Laramie, Wyoming. I am a Christian. I'm an attorney, and I'm a investigator into the definitions of representation and what it means for your everyday life, interacting with lawyers, doctors, electricians, plumbers, but also your elected representatives, and trying to figure out how do we solve the problem of learned helplessness that we see everywhere in our society. I'm excited to be here with you. I'm excited to explore this conversation with Scott Howard, and looking forward to see where the journey takes us. Back to you, Jeff.
Awesome. And Scott. Scott, I met on Twitter, which like we've never actually met in real life, but we've been tweeting for quite some time. Scott, thank you for joining us today. Why don't you tell the people a little bit about yourself?
Thank you for having me, Jeff. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. I always enjoy coming on the show. My name's Scott Howard. I'm a graduate of the University of Florida. I work in the State House of Representatives here in the Sunshine State. I'm an Oklahoman by birth, a bit of a transient in my life. Florida is my current residence, but we'll see where life goes. Major history buff. I read a lot of biographies. I'm an aspiring statesman. I'd like to be great someday, but for now I'm just an aide. So, and I am, of course, happy to be here with Jeff and these fine gentlemen to discuss the issues of the day.
Yeah, so I really I connect with Scott because he reads probably as much as I do, and I'm constantly following his Twitter feed to see what he's reading so I can try to read it first. But we've talked about this on the show. Reading is obviously very important, and for somebody, we've on this show we've interviewed a lot of people who feel like they're helpless, like they have no power, and we speak to a lot of people out there that feel like things are hopeless in the country. And I keep trying to tell them that they're not, because there is a generation of people out there. Scott is one of those people who want to be great, and we need people who want to be great, who are not just wanting to be great, who are actually putting the work and the effort to be great. And that starts with reading the books, studying the history, understanding the problems that we had in the past so we can tackle the problems that we have today. All right. So now that I give you all that extra
Wait,
buzz.
I'm gonna interject
Go ahead.
before you get to
Go
the
ahead.
questions.
Please.
Since we're talking about books, have you read Sorkin's 1929 book there over your shoulder?
I'm about 140 pages into it.
Okay.
I started it yesterday.
I assume he does not mention the 1929 Permanent Apportionment Act.
So right now I'm in April, or yeah, I think it's going like chapter by chapter. It's going like date by date, and I think I just flipped the calendar to April. So the Permanent Apportionment Act passes in June, but my guess is no, it doesn't get mentioned. But I don't know yet because I haven't finished it.
I've been seeing it posted all over the place, and obviously we talk a lot about 1929, and you are correct. It was in June that the Apportionment Act was passed. So I'm interested to hear from you in the future.
Is the overall theme of that book? Is the overall theme just the crash, the financial turmoil from 1929? Okay.
Yeah, it's fairly insightful. It's a lot of stuff I didn't know. And I've read about Hoover's administration and Coolidge's administration, and I was surprised in the biographies that I read how little the stock market crash actually came up. Obviously, like the effects of the stock market crash came up in Hoover's book, but like how it happened, I've never really read the story. I know there's another book out there about it, which it was written a while ago that I haven't read, but this is a lot of parallels to today, which is not good.
I'm pretty sure there's like 10,000 books on that topic out there.
Well, I'm sure I just haven't read them yet. So this is my first one.
You'll get there eventually. I have no doubt.
Eventually. All right. So let's get into the topic. So like there's a lot of things going on in the world right now. One of the more I don't want to say interesting, but maybe worrisome thing is the military action going on in and around Venezuela. President Trump says he doesn't need a formal declaration of war. So my question to you guys is, what should Congress do to reassert its authority and to have the people's voice heard? And as an average citizen, like if you're watching this, you're seeing us strike vessels off the coast of Venezuela. Now, the administration says that they're bringing drugs into the country. They say they have the authority to do this. That's, I would say, up for grabs. And you're maybe worried that we're getting ready to be in another war. What can a citizen do? So, Scott, you're our guest. I'm going to let you lead off with this one.
I appreciate that. So I'll begin with what a citizen can do. As I work in government, call your representative. It is truly amazing how few people actually interact with their representatives on a regular basis. Like if you call them or show up at their office and talk to them, somebody will get you a response. I remember growing up in South Dakota, I called Dusty Johnson's office because I was annoyed by something he did. And a week later, he called me back on my cell. He called me personally and said, "Hey, I got your call. I want to talk to you about this." So, I mean, they will answer. As for what Congress can do, there are a number of options. Congress always has the power of the purse. And as unpleasant as it is to use that sometimes, especially in military matters, it could use them. I'm reminded in the 1990s, Clinton went to war in the Balkans unilaterally. And Gingrich threatened and then backed down, but he threatened to cut funding for the deployment, which would have been messy. If you cut off funding to the troops, that means they have to get home somehow, and that's a mess. But that does end the fight, and so Congress could do that today if it chose to. Problem is they just lack the will, and they don't want that mess in their hands, but they have the option.
So I'll push back. I've called my representative and I've showed up at my representative's office and nobody calls me back or responds to me.
Fair enough. It might be that South Dakota nice and doesn't.
Well,
so
I believe,
what's the other thing
the
is
offices, they'll register your complaint. They'll register what you say, but don't expect a response. There's too, especially in this environment, there's too much going on.
well, so but the other thing is was Dusty a Republican or a Democrat?
Republican.
I don't know. And you're a Republican. So my representative is a Democrat. So I think that might have something to do with it too, possibly. I could be wrong.
Oh yeah,
But
mine's a Republican. Mine's a Republican, and I did not vote for him.
all right, Walter, what do you think? How can Congress reassert its authority? Congress is supposed to be the one that has war powers, yet Trump says that he doesn't need a declaration. They're just going to go out and kill people. That sounds kind of evil villainy, doesn't it?
So, look, I'm looking here at my Constitution that was donated by Dorothy, and Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress the power to declare war. But what we've seen is Congress legislate several acts, right? So, like the authorized use of military force, AUMF. And those AUMFs have been used and granted the executive branch certain authority to execute certain limited military operations, not wars, but
Actions.
they
Legal
look.
action.
It's kind of like the Supreme Court, the definition of porn, right? It's like, oh, you'll know it when you see it, right? It's kind of a very blurry gray area, I think, from a legal perspective. And I think, when you talk about the situation in Venezuela, we have to put it in the context of the war on drugs, which was declared by Reagan. There are congressional laws on the books, right, which schedule all these drugs, which made them illegal. and so they're being manufactured in different countries and then smuggled into the United States, and they've created vast empires of people doing illegal activity. I think one of the best arguments against the quote unquote war on drugs is that basically you've enriched an army of people who have now speedboats and submarines and the rest of it to go under the radar and use subterfuge to disrupt U.S. policy. And so, we have Trump here declaring war on, declaring his executive powers to enable him the use of military force with respect to Venezuela and these cartels. And so I think if Congress were going to take action, right, what they would need to do is essentially rein in these AUMFs, right? And I'll forget the exact enabling legislation, right? But there's enabling legislation post 9/11 that says, if the president declares somebody a terrorist organization, then he can use military force against them. And then there's like a period in which he has to go back to Congress to talk to them. And it is, it's led to this question of like, okay, well, if all I have to do is decide that you're a terrorist, that's kind of I don't know. It's an evolving definition, and obviously that can be abused if you have a president in office that is being liberal with their definitions. And we saw this with Obama and the drone strikes. I think that it continued to an extent under Trump 1, Biden, now Trump 2, and he's basically just moved, I think, that authorization, from the Middle East to South American drug cartels. And it might be because it's a pretext, and actually what we want is their oil. But the pretext is still there. And so, Congress would basically need to reclaim their power and reclaim the power that they have given away to the executive branch to arbitrarily define these situations in which they can use military force, and say actually the situations in which you can use military force need to be narrowed drastically, and that if you're going to use military force, you need to go and get approval by a committee, right, within 24 hours, and then Congress within 48 hours, or 3 days, 5 days. But I think what we're seeing is that the power of the purse is not being utilized, as Scott announced, and he's absolutely right that the power of the purse ultimately is the Congress's kind of final authority, the final check on the executive branch. But the government's shut down right now, right, for a reason, and the executive branch is enjoying that. I think we're seeing that Trump is, my guess is he wants it to extend at least past 30 days so he can fire a bunch of people. But in the interim, right, he's able to kind of funnel money to the programs that he finds of use to him and use the assets that are available. And unless Congress steps up, nothing's going to change. And my frank observation is that things are not going to change in Congress unless we uncap the House, right? That's why we're here. Because I don't think we have a Congress with a backbone that is capable of taking these powers back from the executive branch to narrow the authorized uses of military force absent an uncapping. So that'd be my take.
Yeah, the authorized use of military force, therein lies the problem, in my opinion. Trump is never himself or any in his administration going to come to Congress to lay out the facts and the evidence that they claim they have, right? They're never going to make this stuff public. They're going to say, you question me, you're unpatriotic, you're un-American, we're trying to save America, blah, blah, blah. He's never going to turn over any of the evidence And unless he does, I consider them extrajudicial killings. Now,
Yeah, so
I understand the arguments about the drug flow and all that jazz. Don't disagree. This ain't the way to solve it.
Don Bacon was on the Reagan Caucus podcast this weekend. I listened to it this morning, and they talked about this. And Bacon kind of said almost the same thing. He said, like Trump has identified a real problem, or at least the administration has. Fentanyl flooding into the country is a significant issue. Bacon described, family members that he's had that's died, people all across the state that he knows that have passed away due to, not even like intentional drug overdoses, but like where fentanyl was put into other drugs and they ended up ODing and dying. So like this is a real epidemic in the country. However, he points out that this is the wrong solution. And he says almost similar to what you guys says is like Trump needs to come to Congress and he needs to show the evidence so we can know what he's doing and authorize this. And ultimately I kind of agree with that. I mean, but and then I also agree it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because, as you've pointed out, like the administration and I think Donald Trump in general just kind of likes to throw around his power, his authority, and having somebody else, rubber stamp or agree with him, means that he has somehow less authority.
Well, I mean, they've already stepped aside one time too many when he swung power back when he had a lot less of it.
Well,
Why should we expect him to stand up now that he's more powerful?
I would push back and I would say Congress in general, from president to president to president to president to president, keeps moving the line and allowing this to happen. Walter mentioned Obama, Scott mentioned Bill Clinton, right? Like this is a continuing thing. And, I think foreign policy is the one area where the president of the United States has, more power than any other area. But when it comes to war, there needs to be a check on that. And the war authorization is a check. These what is it? The AMFU, is that what you said, Walter?
AUFM, authorized use of military force. AUMF.
Yeah.
UMF.
UMF. Sorry, I'm not good with letters in right orders. That has given the president more power. And again, if you don't sunset these, if you don't write new rules, they're just going to keep kicking the can down the road. They're going to keep pushing that line and taking more power. I can't remember who it was that said it, but it's like nobody ever willingly gives up their power, but they'll keep taking it.
And how many of those other presidents were operating in an environment where SCOTUS had said, "Yeah, you're immune. Do what you want. Go wild." None. Well, okay, Biden for a few months. Take it back. Biden apparently had immunity too for a few months at the end. I'm not sure he knew that, but anyway, before we leave the topic, all right. Congress, they should be doing all kinds of stuff. There should be committee hearings, hopefully in public. There should be issuing subpoenas to that end. They should be pulling budget levers, as we've talked about, making bipartisan statements condemning the opacity and the lack of evidence. They should be doing all those things, but they won't. And what should citizens be doing? As Scott said earlier, I call it, petition your government for redress of grievances, but call your congressman, petition your government, and, do all the kind of the usual stuff. Sue, organize, and make spectacle. Jeff and I were talking about it last week. The No Kings rally I attended, it's a spectacle. It's a spectacle with a purpose. Jeff's position is there's no call to action. There's no end point. You've gathered all these people. You need to have a specific thing in mind. And he's not wrong. But the spectacle for a purpose has value on its own. And that's something citizens can and should be doing right now. And they are. Done.
I would say that the other thing, or at least Congress, at some point, Congress is going to have to impeach a president. Because, or they're going to have to like...
Impeachment isn't the problem. Conviction is the problem.
Well, but they're not actually impeaching them. If they're not getting them convicted, like because the House is impeaching and then the Senate is not convicting. And I'm not talking just about, like impeachment is it's a purely political tool, right? But it's a tool to rein in power. It's never been used appropriately and it's never been effectively done. And, I think that there's lots of things. I mean, I mentioned it on the show a few weeks ago or a month ago about the TikTok thing. Like, he's willingly not enforcing the law, and it's like, what is the president's job but to execute Congress's will. If there's one thing that Congress has come together on, it was, the TikTok ban, and he's not executing that will, then why not impeach him for doing that? Now, I understand the political, ramifications of that. I understand that Republicans are going to do that, but I'm in an ideal world, in a world where Congress checks the executive as opposed to Republicans check Democrats, you would see impeachment used when the president doesn't do his job or abuses his power. And at some point, we're going to get to a point where it's going to be necessary because something awful is going to happen. Scott, what would you say to something like that?
I mean, I think you're right that in the long run, a successful impeachment is probably necessary for Congress to really reassert itself. Whether that's needed in this particular case in a moment in time, I'll leave up for debate. But I agree that as an exercise of congressional prerogative, impeachment is the best example of that. And then if Congress ever gets serious now or in the future about reasserting itself as not even co-equal, as the preeminent institution in DC, that would be one way to do it. That'd probably be the best way to do it.
Well, here's a question about impeachment, though, because we in this past few sentences we've used the term successful impeachment, and impeachment is not just reserved for use against the president or vice president, right? Other elected officials, SCOTUS justices, right, could be impeached. In my mind, Clarence Thomas is impeachable. If we were to successfully impeach someone who was not the president, someone a little lower than that, do you think that would provide us with any boundaries or momentum or some way to make it successful in other cases going forward if we could get somebody else who wasn't at presidential level?
I mean, I don't think that solves this purpose as far as if the executive has too much power.
Oh, yes.
I don't think it,
I've wandered off the path for sure.
But I mean, showing that Congress will assert its authority is probably a step in the right direction. I don't necessarily know going after Clarence Thomas is the right decision there. I mean, you're not going to be able. No, I get it. And something else could happen. There are, like you mentioned, you can impeach other, people in government. We have before in the past. I can't remember. Was it Balkan? I can't remember the guy's name, but there was a Scott. Do you happen to know the
Belton back in the Grant administration? Belknap, that was it.
Belknap, that's right. Yeah. So he was impeached. And so it could be done.
There was a cabinet member in Harding's administration who was impeached as well, I believe.
Oh.
I know he was eventually thrown in jail. I think he was impeached and convicted and kicked out of the cabinet.
He was the Teapot Dome. Yeah. Yeah.
But y'all, I mean, the problem is that I think in order for impeachment to be effective, at reasserting Congress's power, the people have to trust the impeachment to be legitimate rather than political. And so, at this point, an impeachment by the current Congress would not be viewed as being legitimate. I mean, it's the same thing as the January 6th Commission, right? It's like, okay, yeah, y'all did some fact finding and you issued a report, but probably 60% of the country doesn't really view it as legitimate. So I don't see that as a something that is actually going to bring back legitimacy and power to Congress, because it's not reasserting trust.
Well, so what I would say is in those cases, you didn't have a consensus. And if you were to successfully impeach a president, you would get over 60 votes in the Senate. If you get Congress to agree on it, right, both Republicans and Democrats, I think it builds trust. Okay, if you get people that have been fighting against each other for years to come to an agreement and go, we have to do something about this, then I think that, I see where you're coming from with that, but I think it could be the first step in actually building trust. And then to your point about the Harding administration, I think you're thinking of Albert Fall. It doesn't look like he was impeached though, but he did go. He's the one that was he was convicted of bribery in, guess what year it was? 1929.
But so I mean, I guess I fail to see. You're saying that if Republicans and Democrats could come together and agree on an impeachment, that somehow that would rebuild trust in the institution. And I don't know. Perhaps I'm just more cynical, but they pass a shitty budget, and that does not give me more faith in the budget.
Well, I'll make a quick response to that. I'm sure Jeff is hoping to hurry us on to the next question. I think in the short term, you're probably right. Voters are not gonna look at that cynically. In the long term, an act like that where senators view themselves as senators who are jealous of their prerogatives and act in a way that is jealous of their institution, in the long run, I think that'll do a lot. That would do a lot to engender trust in the institution. In the short term, voters are going to read it as a partisan ploy, in the same way they read bipartisan budgets as just a handout to a way to stay in power. In the long run, I think that'll bake into voters' minds that these people are acting in serious fashion.
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said for the concurrent majority. Like, if you can get a concurrent majority in Congress to agree on something, yes, in the short term, voters are going to be skeptical, but those people are now a majority of Congress are going to go back to their constituents, and they're going to pitch this, and they're going to explain why this was the right thing to do. And overall, like Scott said, that builds trust. And here's the other thing. It builds trust with each other, because you're going to get bipartisan. You're going to get more bipartisan effect than you have had in a really long time. And they're going to be more willing, now that they've kind of like popped that bubble, now they're maybe willing to work together going forward. It's like, you know what? We're no longer the president's lackey here. Now we are actual senators governing the United States of America once again. We are actually going to assert our authority and move forward. Once they unite as a body, then I think you can actually start to get things done again.
Will the base allow them to do that?
I think that the MAGA movement is not just a faction, but it's it truly is. It revolves around President Trump, and so I think if you were to successfully impeach President Trump with the current Congress, you would not win over any of that faction or that movement of people. I think they would die by him, unfortunately. So I respectfully disagree.
Fair. I was talking about impeachment in general, as somebody has to be impeached going forward.
Somebody.
Somewhere.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. Well, I guess if you're not impeaching Trump, maybe. If you're impeaching Trump, I think it's got to be an uncapped House.
All right. Let's move on to the next question. All right. So it's very similar to the first question. The president has taken unilateral authority over tariffs. He's playing hardball with China, and he's placing retribution on Canada. I don't know if anybody saw, but he just like tweeted out, he's like 100% tariffs on Canada because they tweeted out a video of Ronald Reagan. What can Congress do to assert its authority? When is Congress going to be Congress again? Who wants to take the lead on this one?
I guess I would just say same traffic, right?
Same, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's uncap the House, and then you might have a shot at a Congress with a spine who would pass legislation to rein in the executive branch and use its power of the purse to rein in the executive branch.
Well, so again, Bacon was on the podcast, and they talked about this as well. And his point was, from his perspective as a Republican representative, is this is one position where Donald Trump has been very consistent. He's always been a tariff supporter. He won the election, and a lot of Republicans, even though they disagree with tariffs, are, I think from the way he describes it, willing to let him see this economic plan out. Even though it's putting hardship on, citizens right now, this is his signature economic plan. This is what he wants to do. He won the election. They're going to, I don't think they're willing to play hardball on it yet. They're going to kind of let him play it out. He also points out that the inconsistencies in the tariffs are probably hurting his own plan, but I think that's Donald Trump. He's just inconsistent. So, Scott, what do you think?
First, I agree with the comment you just made, and I think people forget that this is generally how elections are meant to go, and it's because it's a very strange issue to die on. But in theory, a president and his Congress are supposed to run on a platform and then implement the platform. So you're right. This is the platform he ran on. This is the platform he won on. For better or worse, he's going to implement it. That's what's going on. Congress, if it's so decided to end this, does actually have legislation already on the books that allows it to repeal these tariffs. When they granted the president this limited tariff authority, they created a review process by which you can file in the House and the Senate and by a simple majority in the tariffs. They have, so institutionally they have the capacity to do this. Politically, as you noted, they're going to let it play out until voters start making them feel the heat. When my very specific prediction is that when soybean farmers in the Midwest start calling Senator Thune and Senator Grassley and Kim Reynolds and all these Midwestern Republicans saying, "Hey, look, we can't sell any of our beans. We're going to go bankrupt. What are you doing?" That's when you'll start to see movement in Congress. Until then, they're just going to sit and watch because this is the platform you want on.
Yeah, I believe that. I mean, I saw Thune talk about this. They are calling him, and he has mentioned that before. So, and I think the interview that I saw with him said that they are throwing their soybeans in the trash, which is probably not good. Roger, you're muted.
Yeah, leaving them on the ground to rot. The soybeans.
Yeah. So what do you think they should do, Roger?
I don't think it really makes much difference at this point. The damage is done. Those markets have shifted, and it might be possible to get those markets back if we still had the goodwill of the rest of the world. But so much of the rest of the world is looking at America as either unreliable or counterproductive or maybe even evil. There's a lot of bad will towards America. It's going to be very hard to get those markets back whenever Republicans decide they're going to stand up to Trump.
I got to jump in here for a second. I grew up working on a rice farm. My uncle remains a rice farmer. He works for the USA Rice Federation, and so does my aunt. And I would just say that, commodities are ultimately commodities, and so I do think that if tariffs change, ultimately commodities do end up being. I don't think there's a whole lot of long-term ill will in the commodities game. It's a financial market.
And we'll have to cut prices drastically to get the markets back.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll also say that there are places where they take pride in their product, and they don't want to import American products because they are viewed as being tainted. And we've worked very hard to get them there, and to the extent that that kills this goodwill, I do think there is risk there, for sure. But if the entire global commodities market crashes and people are starving, people will end up buying the grain that is the least expensive. And
right,
that's not to say that America's reputation is not irretrievably damaged, despite whether or not they're buying our commodities.
Yeah, but Trump doesn't care because he's got all those crypto dollars. He doesn't care about commodities. Anyway.
All right.
I have a lot to say about what citizens should do. You want me to go through that or no?
Yeah, tell us, please. What should a citizen do, Roger?
Well, start by voting against MAGA candidates every opportunity you get. And as far as
hold on, how are you going to get? And look, I understand where you're coming from with that, but you don't have enough people on your side to win those elections. How are you going to get some of the people that support MAGA candidates to vote with you?
What percentage of the voters are MAGA?
I mean, I would say you probably have about 30% of voters are MAGA, and you've got probably 20% are anti-Democrat.
Okay, I said vote against MAGA. I didn't say vote against Republicans. I said vote against MAGA. Vote against the 30%. How do we not have enough to beat the 30%?
Because the 20% of anti-Democrats are going to vote with MAGA when a crazy Democrat is running in the election.
And because parties, because the primary system has polarized us. Right?
There's crazy people on both sides of the party.
So as far as tariffs are concerned, we're coming up on the holiday season. I say give books as gifts, or maybe even digital gifts. Or better still, buy something that you're going to give as a gift from the artisan who made it. Go to the farmers markets, go to the street fairs, spend your money in your local community, right? Deny money to the tariff coffers, to the billionaires, and buy from eBay instead of Amazon. Buy from Shoemakers instead of Guitar Center. You guys don't know Shoemakers. It's a local place here in town. But the point is, try to buy from some place that's not going to put money directly into a billionaire's pocket. buy from Target, right? Yes, I understand there are billionaires that are part of Target's investor class, but it's not like Jeff Bezos sitting there. Every dollar is going into, some portion of every dollar is going right into his pocket. Buy from co-ops, um, bank at a credit union, eat at farm to table joints, patronize independent bookstores. These people, um, we're in late stage capitalism here, right? And things are being engineered in such a way that if you buy without intention, you're going to be funding the people who are going to continue to take advantage of you. And then, as far as just your information environment, I've never been one to listen to a single source of news. And at this point, I don't rely on any media outlet that is controlled by a profit-seeking entity, right? I get my primary news from Associated Press, PBS, or NPR, and then I even don't trust them. I go check them. I read English language versions of Le Monde and Der Spiegel and English language papers out of the UK, because the rest of the world watches our politics almost as closely as we do. You can get good information. The point is, in late stage capitalism, I'm finding we all have to try and triangulate the truth. You're not going to get the truth from any one source. You got to triangulate it. That takes effort, and we got to convince people to make the effort. Done talking.
I like your idea. We should be buying books for gifts. That's actually what I buy everybody for Christmas. It hasn't made me very popular in my family, but I continue to do it. Right now, I have $80 of rewards points at Barnes and Noble. I'm looking to get that up to 100 before Christmas, so I can say that. Scott, what do you have to say about that? Like, so, and before I let you answer, so Roger, when you're talking about buying locally, isn't that kind of what Trump's trying to do with the tariffs? Is force us to buy locally?
No, buy domestically is not the same as locally.
Fair. Scott, what do you say?
Well, so Roger's right that he's trying to make you buy domestic. However, it does prompt another comment I was going to make on your first question is what Congress can do about this. Another alternative answer is that they'll do nothing because the preferred policy outcome of the tariffs is achieved, and that is a larger manufacturing base in America, less reliance on commoditized and financialized tools like Wall Street sells, and more money invested in brick and mortar shops. And so what you will end up seeing is an America that is on paper less wealthy, but that's because people are spending more money on fewer items because they buy local or they buy domestic. And then Congress won't do anything about it. And that, historically speaking, you could have a coalition of city laborers, like the McKinley Coalition with high tariffs, or Midwestern farmers. You don't get both because obviously trade policy doesn't agree with both. It's possible that the GOP's coalition just shifts in a way that they don't have to rely on Midwestern farmers to win, in which case tariffs won't go away anyway.
All right. So we talked about Republicans a little bit. We talked about that MAGA faction. Let's get into this one. So a Trump appointee, Paul Ingrazia, I'm probably mispronouncing that, has withdrawn over some controversial statements. Last week or the week before, we saw the leak of the Young Republican group chat that revealed some hateful rhetoric. What exactly is going on, and how do we get our country back on track? I could pull up the hateful rhetoric and I could spew a few of the lines out, but I think we've probably all seen them before, so I'll just keep them. They can keep their stuff private. We know that they said things they shouldn't have said, and they're getting appointed to high political positions, and they're having to withdraw, which is frankly an embarrassment for the administration. But I think, we saw this in the Jay Jones thing, with the text. We talked about this on the show last week and the week before as well. This isn't just a Republican thing. Politicians are saying some really just awful things. How do we get better people in charge? Walter, you want to go first on this one?
Sure. The first thing I have to go back to what Roger was talking about just briefly and say the idea of late stage capitalism or late capitalism is kind of a disputed point. So I'll just kind of throw that out there.
Well, so is the
We're
60% of the January
we're gonna talk about
6th,
that on the.
so,
We're gonna
yeah.
we're gonna talk about the late stage capitalism or whatever on next week's show. So we'll come back to
Okay.
it. Don't worry.
All right, we'll pause. Yeah, I think that honestly, the algorithms are probably a lot to blame. I just spent my weekend back in Memphis, and that's where my alma mater, Rhodes College, is. And I spent a lot of time hanging out with people of color and had amazing conversations about representation and the need to uncap the House and what they're doing and all the amazing things that are going on despite the news cycle. And spending that time in person made me realize that I think I had been like a tiny bit radicalized spending too much time on the internet, right? That in fact the internet is radicalizing people. It is pushing people to more extreme positions because that is what leads them to more engagement. And I think we just have to continue to condemn that, right? To say, if you're spending all your time on the internet, glad you're here right now listening to this, but go out and touch grass.
Scott, what do you say? You're a young Republican, right?
Yeah,
Like
one I want to say, Walter's lying. This show is the most radicalizing I've ever been on. No, I am a young Republican, and I, as noted on my shirt, I recently graduated college, and I was around these people, and I of this crowd. Even if I'm not, of a kind with this crowd. Yes, the internet is a large part to blame. It is an inherently radicalizing institution. It is it is the last frontier for mankind. And like any frontier, if you throw individuals out there with no guidance, no training, they're going to come back half savage beasts, because you adopt the characteristics of the frontier you're a part of. It happens in American history. It happened in British history. It happens everywhere there's a frontier. The first people who go out there become savages. That's just what happens. Back to nature and such. Another part is that you see the collapse of the post-World War II consensus on politeness for politeness' sake. Right? People are nice for the sake of being nice in a desire to pursue a broad-based consensus. And with the collapse of that consensus and the collapse of that desire to be nice, you see people who are rushing to the edges of the Overton window just because. The third reason is that young people naturally rebel. It's true since time immemorial. And in politics or in language, the way to rebel is to say edgy things. So you see particularly young men on the right pushing the Overton window as far as they can to make jokes, to sound edgy, to make waves. And over time, if you say something enough, you start to believe it. So now you get young men radicalizing themselves because they make the same joke over and over again. And at some point, it stops being a joke. Right? At some point, Hitler was a good dude stops being an edgy thing to say and starts being, maybe he was a good dude. For you are, as an individual, you are going to self-rationalize whatever you say. And if you say heinous things long enough, you start to believe them.
Roger?
Well, I'm not on the inside of this one. I mean, I have thoughts, but yeah, I put it down to basically just a lack of awareness, intelligence, zeitgeist, paying attention. We've got decades and decades of failure in poorly funded public schools, and you've got deficient instruction in other kinds of schools, home schools and private schools. You add a thick layer of decades of reading those rags at the grocery store checkout, all the conspiracy fantasies and those things. You've got magical thinking curated from a lifetime in churches. And then into all that, somebody pours a ridiculous amount of misinformation, and we're surprised that people believe outlandish things and that they repeat and say outlandish things and that they believe Hitler was a good guy or whatever. It's an overall failure of the entire society. It happens to show up in this case in these heinous things that this one group of people said. There may be people on the left saying disgusting things about Republicans too. I don't know. I don't see it. Maybe it'll come out. But for the moment, we've engineered a society where these kinds of people can get traction and make community.
So, I mean, we've definitely seen Democrats say hateful things about Republicans. We talked about on the show the last 2 weeks. Jay Jones, talked about his political opponent, children being murdered in the race that is happening in Virginia. We've seen lots of hateful things.
Yeah, but there wasn't 39. How many? What? 290 pages of it. I mean, he said a couple of one guy said a couple of bad things. Maybe some other people have said bad things. This was a whole group of people saying ridiculously bad stuff.
Well, I mean,
they were in private.
Right. And one of them is running for a position of power, and the other 200 and whatever are just,
One of them's a sitting state legislator. He's already elected.
So what I'll say is, I think Scott's hit the nail on the head, and Walter, with what they said. The New Frontier thing, the edginess, pushing that Overton window. These are things that happen over and over again in society. The thing that I'll add to that is behavior runs down. It trickles down, right? Like it's a trickle down behavior. If you're a parent and you're kind of nasty to people, guess what? Your kids are going to be nasty to people. If you're a parent and you're polite and you use your please and your thank yous, chances are your kids are going to be polite and use their please and your thank yous. And I would say that our political leaders have made conscious choices. And I think it kind of started with, Donald Trump and the way that he decided to, behave in his first election, running for office, where he said what he wanted to say. He didn't really care. He was, he almost purposely pushed that envelope. And so, and then the other thing is like, he's not really a person with principles or, conviction. It's all about what can you do for him. So it attracts people that are going to be loyal to him and push the envelope to, quote, own the libs, right? And, you attract these things. I call it spoiled power, right? Because politics, the way that you get things done is through patronage, by giving out jobs. So all of these people are all looking for jobs, and the way that you look for jobs is you socialize, you network. You have to act like the people that you're around in order to get in the room and to get the job. So it becomes this thing that if the people at the top are doing it, then the people following are going to do it because they need to get in the room. I kind of like with the impeachment thing with Congress, at some point the tide's going to turn. At some point something's going to happen, and you're going to get a different way of doing
turning.
it.
It's the fourth turning.
I don't know if that's exactly it here, but Walter, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, so I think the politeness for politeness sake, kind of post World War II mandate that Scott spoke about. I think it's important to realize, because I think part of what Trump was reacting to and what he brought to the scene was a reaction to something that felt scripted, that was more like reality TV, right? And so Trump felt unscripted, right? He was willing to push the boundaries and say things that were a little bit taboo. I think about him at one of the Republican debates calling out all of the donors who were booing him in the crowd, right? Kind of like breaking the fourth wall there on screen. And, we have this problem, right, of, going between extremes, right? On the one hand, being just absolutely polite, and then on the other hand, just saying the most outlandish things you can say in order to garner attention. And my belief is that by uncapping the House, we can find some sort of middle ground where reason prevails rather than script or outlandishness.
All right, so these cats were making these comments to each other in a private text exchange. They weren't seeking attention.
They were seeking attention within their own in-group.
Yeah,
it-
because
like,
you got a network-
it's the same thing as like a fraternity or a sorority or any other group. People do and say crazy shit in order to, win the favor of the people, perceived as having sway or power.
Okay, well, that doesn't improve their situation any, in my opinion.
well, we're
If
all
that's
in
the kind of people
disagreement.
they're hanging with and hope to be part of, then that doesn't improve them in my estimation.
Yeah, well, I don't think anybody here is saying that. I think we're saying is they think it does, and that's the problem.
Right.
Ultimately.
Exactly.
All right. Okay. So next question here. We're seeing a lot of gerrymandering, and I'm gonna give a little bit of like a history foundation for this one. So in the lead up to the Civil War, gerrymandering became a weapon for radicals. Now, you've heard me or have written about it in the Hill. Leading up to the Civil War, there was an imbalance of representation. The Three-Fifths Compromise tilted representative power in Congress to the Southern slaveholders. The Democratic Party, through Andrew Jackson and then Martin Van Buren, they built this strong party that was co-opted by the slave power after them. They used this to advance their goals of slavery. This became a defining issue of the generation. Now, the Northern Party, it wasn't a sectional conflict yet, but the Whigs were the opposition party. They faltered because they weren't they didn't hold together strong enough. Eventually, you had new parties form, and you had two factions take control of these parties: the Southern Fire Eaters and the Northern Abolitionists. Now, the Northern Abolitionists were, somewhat radical as well. Obviously, we all agree that slavery is bad and should be abolished. However, Northern abolitionists like William Lloyd Garrison thought that the Constitution should be abolished with it. So what you had is an imbalance of power. You had two radical parties or factions take control of the parties, and then they used gerrymandering in order to gain and control power in Congress. What we've seen, because of the capped house and the issue of immigration, we've seen two, what I believe, radical factions take control of both parties. First, it was the progressives, and it was, well, I don't know first, but you've got the Tea Party / MAGA movement that's taken control of the Republican Party. And then you've got the, progressives that have taken control of the Democratic Party. Now, what we see is both parties are using gerrymandering as a political tool to gain power. We saw it first in California. This week, Virginia announced that it's going to try to do mid-districting. We've seen it in Texas, Ohio, and I saw a tweet before I got on the show. Illinois was talking about doing mid-districting, redistricting as well.
California was not first. Texas was first, per Trump's request.
Okay. Texas, California, Ohio, all of the states are redistricting.
Texas started it. California only did it in response to Texas. They were explicit about it. Gavin Newsom spent millions of dollars on a campaign to explain to people that we're only doing this because Texas is doing it. In fact, I think they have language in there that if Texas is unsuccessful, then their movement won't work. I haven't read that language, but that's what I've heard.
Is this good for American democracy, and how does this serve the people? Scott?
No, I don't think it's great for American democracy. Not because I think gerrymandering is inherently wrong. Obviously, there are levels to it that become wrong, but these are the rules of the game. But you have to play the rules of the game as everybody understands them. It is important for democracy on a metaphysical level that the rules are stable. You don't change them suddenly. And when you decide randomly to redistrict mid-decade, rather than every 10 years, as is the accepted custom, you have destabilized the game, right? Beyond that, now maybe it stabilizes until we redistrict every 5 years instead of 10. Unlikely, but that could be the chance. Problem is, you have now set the precedent that whenever state houses flip, you can redistrict at a whim and ad nauseum, and that's not good for voters year-over-year projections on whether the system works. Right? You need stability in the system for it to function. The people who are currently redistricting are doing so from a position that they think they'll be in power forever, which simply isn't true. The last comment on it I'll say is that turnabout is fair play. So if you're in a state where that's redistricting mid-decade, don't be surprised when other states do it, or don't be surprised when you lose power in 5, 10, 15 years and your opponents do it as soon as they retake the House.
And here's a point to follow up on that, because in North Carolina, where I am, this is the third time we've redistricted in this decade. Originally, the GOP-controlled General Assembly tried to pass a map, and the state Supreme Court said no, that's not acceptable, go back. And so they came back with a fairer map. A year later, after elections, the Supreme Court, now the majority flipped to the Republicans. So the Supreme Court overturned their own precedent from the year before so that the General Assembly could pass a more unfavorable, a more gerrymandered map. And now they're taking it again and doing an even more unfavorable map. So it's not only a question of the stability of the game in terms of the legislatures, the state Supreme Courts are getting involved, at least in North Carolina in this case, and creating more instability.
So I've been thinking about gerrymandering and uncapping the House quite a bit, and I've come to the conclusion that there's kind of two issues at play. One is if you drastically increase the number of the size of the House, you make the district smaller, and so what it does is it makes it visually more difficult to draw a gerrymandered district that doesn't look ridiculous. Right? So this is why we see in the state houses, when you have smaller districts, the gerrymandering tends to be more egregious, right? The districts are less compact, as the scientists say. And so that's kind of thought one. The other thought is that because of learned helplessness, people don't pay attention to that, right? They're like, people are checked out because they don't know what to trust. And they don't really care what's happening in the state houses because they don't have any control over the federal government, where most of their taxes go, and the decision to send their sons or daughters off to war are made. So I think if you uncap the House substantially, you make it harder to gerrymander without it being kind of visually apparent, and then you have the opportunity for people to care about it and care about whether or not their state legislators are doing it. I buy the idea that redistricting every 10 years it was the custom and we've broken it and that's bad. But I think redistricting more frequently would be okay, so long as that is on the radar of the constituents. That this is of paramount importance. For purposes of your representation, but that it's easy to see, right? That if you have legislators drawing these crazy maps, you can see it visually quickly, and you vote the bastards out of office, right? If you keep doing it, you just send a message. If you gerrymander in ways that are solely partisan, that's I'm a Republican, but I don't. I'm not looking for solely partisan ends, right? I'm a Republican looking for compromise with Democrats. And I think, that was the objective. It should be the objective, that there is power in compromise. And I think that is possible. And it could be possible with frequency, but you need people that are paying attention.
I have a question for Scott. I don't want to get deep into it, but a quick one. You talked about politeness for politeness' sake and how that's part of the problem we have in electoral politics is people aren't being polite. They're saying all this horrible stuff. We have had guests on this show, and we have talked ourselves about alternative voting methods, ranked choice voting, star voting. Star voting seems to be the thing that we are all happiest about. And with star voting, that would give people an incentive to not demonize their opponent. right? They would be needing some of that person, or maybe I'm thinking of ranked choice voting. But the point is, we can engineer systems in which candidates don't demonize their opponent because they may need that opponent's supporters, to some of them, to come over and help that person get over the line. Do you think that would improve the lack of politeness in our society? Something like that?
I think it might. And I'm going to clarify that comment. I'm not actually convinced the end of the politeness for politeness sake consensus was a bad thing. Because what in theory replaced it was a profound desire and search for truth, as opposed to being polite and offsetting some of those burning questions. The problem is not that we got rid of that, although we should be more civil with each other. The problem is that a search for truth is not what replaced that consensus, right? It was just anything is up for grabs now. So what we should have seen is a much more grounded desire for truth and an ability to ask those deeper questions about who the nation's going to be and how we're going to govern ourselves in a civil way. We didn't get that. So new voting systems could be one way to do that. I'm not convinced we need a new system. I think the problem is much deeper. The problem lies in the hearts of men, and a new system isn't going to fix that completely, although it might help. I'm open to discussion on that.
Okay, thanks.
Reviving a culture of civic mindedness is paramount.
All right, Jeff, are you moving us forward?
I'm muted now. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So what I'll say is, tagging on to what Scott said about, like, we have to ask the question, who do we want to be as a country? Like, where do we want to go? And, as I pointed out in the lead up to that question, there are a lot of parallels of what's going on right now that went on to the Civil War. If you could replace immigration with slavery. We have an imbalance of power. Like, these are things. I had a message sent to me today on Twitter from somebody from California, and let me find it real quick. The message said, "This House redistricting nonsense on both sides is insane. It's a prelude to civil war." And it's because it's kind of legislative war. That is what we did to each other in the lead up to the Civil War. The Democrat, or the Whig Party, felt completely pushed around by the Democratic Party in the state of Virginia. Let's see if I can find the quote here. Sorry, I lost it. I had it pulled up so I could have it on the show. But it was a great quote from the paper leading up to the Civil War. And, like, I guess my point is we're fighting about Trump, we're fighting about tariffs, we're fighting about congressional authority, we're fighting about all these different things. But what we really need to do is we need to start discussing reform, right? Like, we need to fix the representative issue. We need to write real rules on immigration. Like, we need real immigration reform. We haven't had serious immigration reform. I think
didn't we do that? Didn't James Lankford lead a group that wrote serious immigration reform? And Trump said, "No, we're not going to do it." We did it. We tried it. He stopped it.
So, but it didn't happen though. Like, we don't actually have it. So, like, we still need to do that thing, right? Like, we've got to fix the representative issue. People need to be able to speak their representative. They need to have a voice in government again. And we need to be able to solve a lot of these problems. And we're only going to do it if we fix these issues. And we got to stop, with the name calling and the fighting and the standing on our principles and the spectacles. Like, the spectacles are like part of the problem. Trump is a spectacle. A protest is a spectacle. If you're going to have a protest and you're not going to have an ends to your mean, then it's just a spectacle. And a spectacle is just another thing that the other side can use against you. Like, we need to be serious. Like, we have to be serious about these issues. And I just, there are serious problems going on in the world, and we're just ignoring them.
All right, we need to get the rest of our questions. We're already after 9 o'clock.
All right.
This is energizing.
Last week, President Trump pardoned George Santos. Everybody knows who he is, right? This week, he pardoned Binance founder Changpeng Zhao, probably mispronouncing that. I apologize.
The bad
These
guy
pardons
from
follow
China.
many other congressional controversial pardons, including those who stormed the Capitol on January 6th. Is he abusing his power, and what, if anything, could Congress do about it? Scott?
So to the first question, yes, I think this is an abuse of the pardon power. Um, I don't think it's that substantively different than most presidents' abuse of the pardon power. That is the one power that presidents are indeed entrusted with unilaterally and unlimited. Um, every other power is constrained by something, whether a need for Congress to act to support it or the bounds of the Constitution. Pardoning is unlimited. Um, as to what Congress can do about it, there isn't much. Congress could punish him in theory, restricting funding to some of his projects or whatever. But as I said, pardoning is an unlimited power. You would have to amend the Constitution to fix it. I'm also not convinced that, as far as abused powers go, pardoning is the worst. Right? Less people in jail isn't great. Criminals should go to jail for the crimes they've committed. On net, fewer people in prison is a lesser evil compared to some of the other powers he could be abusing. So that is one area where I suggest we just wait out the current president, because the next guy will probably be less. Now, if this becomes a pattern of president after president going beyond the usual circumstances, like Biden pardoned his son, which is an abuse, but it's an expected abuse. And every president in the last week of office pardons hundreds of criminals because they were convicted of some crime the president doesn't think should be a crime. Right? Clinton pardoned drug users, Bush pardoned certain people, Obama pardoned drug users.
Mark Rich. Clinton
It's an
pardoned Mark
abuse.
Rich.
It's an abuse, but it's an abuse that the system can live with because it's not permanently damaging to our institutions. So as far as Trump goes, I would just wait it out. Now, it could get really bad, and we could need to amend it and I've seen proposed amendments to the pardon power, but as of right now, sitting on our hands doing nothing is probably the best bet.
Walter?
So the reason that the pardon power is somewhat unlimited is because the prosecutorial power is also somewhat unlimited, right? So the Department of Justice has unlimited discretion, and they have prosecutorial immunity for the decisions that they make with respect to who they might indict and prosecute. So, a cop can see two people jaywalk and catch one and prosecute them and let the other one go. That power, that discretion is unlimited. And so I think that's why you see an unlimited pardon power, because you're basically saying, okay, you have an unlimited power to prosecute people. You also have an unlimited power to pardon those people, even from prior administrations, because maybe they got it wrong and the judicial court got it wrong. You also see this in the courts and equity. So equitable powers of courts, they trace their roots all the way back to the kingly courts in the United Kingdom. So we had courts at law, and then we had equitable courts. And the equitable courts were endowed with the power to essentially fix problems where the law fell short, right? So you have kind of a scenario where, okay, yeah, maybe that was technically illegal, but if you look at the entire story, this person should not have been rotting away in prison. And so, I would just say every pardon is controversial, and every pardon is an abuse of some power, just like every decision to prosecute a person is an abuse or use of that power. And I certainly don't think that these particular pardons are any worse than Biden before charges had been brought, pardoning a whole host of people. And it does require a constitutional amendment. So if we want to do that, we would want to have an uncapped House first before we were to propose any amendments or have a convention of the states where the Congress is calling for a convention of the states. We want a body that we can trust to actually amend that power in a way that is rational, reasonable, and not going to do some injustice to the institutions.
Yeah, but is prosecutorial power really unlimited? I recall some prosecutions that had been started against Donald Trump that were not allowed to go forward. Is prosecutorial power really unlimited in America in the same way that pardons are? I say no.
I would say that so long as the prosecutor is acting within their discretion is unlimited.
Okay, I'll accept that.
I mean, I kind of agree. I mean, I think the reason I put this question is it's more to the behavior thing. Is I think there's a pattern of the people that Trump is pardoning is it's corruption. It's like
Yep.
people that are doing corruption are getting pardoned, and it's signaling to other people that it's okay to be corrupt.
Just to play the devil's advocate, I think what Trump would say is everyone playing this game is corrupt, and only certain people are targeted for political ends. And so I'm gonna, do some justice by setting these particular corrupt people free and targeting these other corrupt people. I'm not taking a view on that, but I just think that's probably the analysis that is going through his brain.
No, I agree. That's exactly what I was about to say. Is that I agree. That's exactly everything's corrupt, so nothing's corrupt. I'm going to rub it in your face.
And haven't been convicted, and the people who were pardoned have been convicted. They were indicted by a grand jury, convicted in a court of law. Right. That's my piece. I'll just have to remind you of all of that.
That's all true. My last comment on this matter, because we live in a democratic system where the chief executive, like the chief prosecutor, changes every 4 to 8 years. The ultimate discretion lies in the hands of the president, and therefore the people who elected him. So yes, these pardons are probably corrupt, and yes, you are correct, Roger, that the prosecutions against Trump went away as soon as he became president. But that is because in 2024, the American people looked to the choices and said, all else being equal, I would rather Trump in office, these flaws and all, than the alternative.
But the prosecutions were stopped before the election, though. Some effectively stopped before the election, so not all of the evidence came out before the election. Okay, then push it back. True.
But in general, the buck stops with the American people when it comes to Justice Department prosecutions and therefore pardons as the flip side of that. So if people decide that it's too corrupt, they will demand reform or they'll demand change. Generally, in the American system, a little bit of corruption is accepted so long as the system is seen to be working. Historically speaking, the American people will tolerate certain corruption from their tribe. If it greases the wheels, so be it. Right now, I have yet to see any proof that the American people are up in arms about it yet. They might, but time will tell.
All right. Last question for the night. According to recent reports, President Trump is humiliating executive assistant Mike Johnson behind closed doors. Is executive assistant Mike Johnson up for the job of Speaker of the House? Roger, I'll let you go first on this one.
No, he was never up for the job. That's probably the reason he got the job. It's probably the reason they could agree on him. And to be fair, I don't think anyone else would fare any better in this current environment, And this is in large measure due to the Permanent Reapportionment Act of 1929, as we've discussed before. It enables the extremists in Congress, routinely on television or in print or, a clip somebody's posted on X, you see some elected Dems saying, these GOP, my colleagues, they tell me in private that they're so worried about what Trump's doing and they decry what Trump's doing, but they won't stand up to him, right? They say they feel powerless, so to keep their heads down. So this could have been stopped several times earlier along the way. We could have uncapped the House decades ago, and if not for the effect of the House on the Electoral College, we had a much larger Electoral College. I argued Trump would never have won the Electoral College in 2016. It could have been stopped when he was impeached. The Supreme Court could have ruled in favor of Colorado, where the Supreme Court had ruled that he had committed or had engaged in insurrection. There was plenty of places along the way where this could have been stopped. And at every gate, Republicans opened the gate and said, go ahead. That's where we are.
Scott, what do you think about Mike Johnson?
Truthfully, within the bounds of what is expected of a speaker nowadays, I think he's doing an okay job. Now, those bounds, that limit is pretty low, right? Compared to McCarthy, right, when the judgment was don't get kicked out of office 6 weeks in and failed,
Yeah.
then he's doing pretty well. But as you have all mentioned many times in this show, and as I will mention now, the long-term solution to this is to uncap the House. You have to make the House big enough that majorities are functional. Right now, the House is permanently a coin flip between whose party controls it, which means literally 3 or 4 members dominate the House and who is Speaker, which is not how the system was meant to work. Whether the Speaker is supposed to have power is a different question, but as it is, he does have power, which means you have to have a majority that can function, which means you need more members in the House so that the elected majorities are functional. You need a large enough House that your majority can function. You have enough Speaker votes to function properly, and to be large enough that the people who rise up to be Speaker want the power to be Speaker, and in wanting the power, want the body to function. So you have to get ambitious people to the top. As it is, that's not how it works because the Speaker is held captive by 3 members, and we being Republican Speaker in the United States of America is the worst job in America historically. We haven't had a good Republican Speaker in 100 years. So, but I digress. Relative to what the job standard is for Republican Speaker, my job is doing okay. But it could be better. If we uncap the House, it could be a lot better.
So, and I'll let you get in. I just want to add something here. You know, all the parallels I was talking about with the lead up to the Civil War and what we're going through now. One of the other ones is this was the first time leading up to the Civil War where we couldn't elect a Speaker of the House, and we couldn't elect it again because of the imbalance of representation. Small factions were able to control and stalemate the election, which is essentially what you get in the House now. That's why we had, how many, I can't remember how many votes it took to get McCarthy in there.
6 or 7.
And so, again, the problem is persisting. Like, we need to address the real problem, and that is we need to uncap the House. Walter, go ahead.
Yeah, I think probably Mike Johnson as an individual is not terrible. He's playing the hand that he's been dealt, and I would have played it differently, obviously, but he's chosen to play it, and he is certainly playing the game. And my view would, I think, be akin to Yuval Levin's, which is, one of the top reasons to uncap the House, even a small uncap, even if you only brought in, 150 new members, you're very likely to get a very robust rules change, such that the Speaker of the House would have much less power over the House, and I think that would be a good thing, so that the House Speaker, frankly, is doing more of a job of herding cats and committees to get floor votes as prescribed by the rules, rather than manipulating the rules to serve the executive branch. And we certainly, our founders thought that the legislative branch would be the most powerful branch, and that they would be, kind of potentially usurping the power of the executive. And that was one of the reasons for the creation of the judiciary, right? Is to help balance that potential imbalance between the two. And I think we see the opposite. And that's why we've seen Supreme Court decisions that are, pushing more and more power back into the Congress. But we need a strong speaker. We need a stronger speaker, or we need, Mike Johnson to have a revelation, right? That he does have the power to frankly course correct and change things in a very substantive way to not only uncap the House, but redirect the power of Congress as a balancing act with the executive branch rather than as a servant of the executive branch.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I
I
understand what you
just
guys are.
want to say, I love the Yuval Levin comments. Yuval Levin is, if we were to have a philosopher king, he would have my vote. So
We should elect Yuval Levin as Speaker of the House.
yeah,
That's what we should do.
he would be.
And,
Yeah, it
and
doesn't have to be a member of the House, right? It can just be anyone.
Can be anybody.
yeah,
I say that
Um,
every 2 years when we have a speaker election, and nobody has voted for me yet. So
well, and my argument is when the Speaker vote gets stalemated, that's the time you can elect somebody that's not in the House. I wrote an article for Newsweek about how Justin Amash should be elected Speaker of the House back when the first stalemate happened. I would much rather have Yuval Levin in that position because I just think he's better qualified. Not that Amash isn't a smart guy, but there's politics there. Yuval's kind of outside of the political, you know, not completely outside the political realm, but you know what I mean, not an actual politician.
Yeah.
But to the Mike Johnson thing, like I get what you're saying. He's playing the hand that he's dealt. And I want to go back to what Scott said at the beginning, which is he wants to be great. And it's very clear that Mike Johnson doesn't want to be great. Because if he did want to be great, he would take that concentrated amount of power that he has and he would walk into the Democratic offices of Jared Golden and Maria Gluesenkamp Perez, who have a subcommittee on electoral reform that specifically is talking about uncapping the House. He would, I think Sean Casten as one that supported it, he would rally together Democrats and Republicans together, and he would start a reform movement. He would start to rein in executive's authority by empowering Congress to be a legislative, deliberative body again, specifically the House of Representatives, obviously. But he is, like most politicians, he is playing the game of winning the next election, keeping his party happy, and making sure he has a paycheck in donors. That is not trying to be great. And that's not really what the country needs right now. And because he's doing that, Trump is able to push him around. And, he does kind of look weak. So, we'll see what happens in the long term. But, I haven't been a fan. And, I have my little joke, my running joke that he's executive assistant. But, I think any Speaker of the House at this point, if they're not going to start to reform and take back power into the House, then they are an executive assistant and nothing more.
No, I agree. I think that your joke is well placed, and it's a serious problem, and it is going to take a bully, right, in the job of the Speaker if they want to take that power back. I think is probably what we're looking for in the next Speaker. So I actually don't know if Yuval Levin is the feckless bully that I might choose, but he might have an idea of who would be the right pick.
That's an interesting point. Look, I don't really know Yuval. I've met him, but I don't really know him. I don't know if he has that type of temperament, but I do know that he has the intellect. He has the ideas, right? I think at that point, you just have to hire the right staff. You don't have to be the bully. Hire the bullies on your staff that you can, but the nice
whip.
bullies. The whip. You need a whip, hire Scott. Scott, will you be the bully?
I certainly can try. I'd love to be House Speaker someday. It looks so much fun to be a Republican Speaker of the House since Newt Gingrich took over. I want to try my hand at it. Looks like a great time.
All right. Well, that is it for our questions tonight. I appreciate you guys. I'm going to go around the horn here. Final words, comments. I'll start with Roger.
Oh, start with me. I'll fall back on some of my old favorite hits. The last time the U.S. House was expanded, Buffalo Bill's Wild West show was still touring the world.
I don't know what Buffalo Bill is.
Buffalo Bill's Wild West show? Please.
I mean, I've heard of it, but I don't actually know what it is. I don't think I've ever seen it. Or
Annie Oakley, the sharpshooter, the Wild West show, General Custer, all that jazz.
Sounds
They made
familiar.
movies about this.
I don't think I've
There's
seen
an
any of them.
entire city in Wyoming
Cody.
that is
yeah.
centered around this
Cool.
existence. And I lived there, or I'm sorry, I lived next to there for a number of years. And there's the Buffalo Bill Center of the West, which holds a Smithsonian museum called the Whitney, or affiliated museum. And so there's a lot. There's one more biography for you, Jeff.
You know, the Old West had died, and Buffalo Bill put together a troupe of Native Americans and cowboys and ranchers and saloon girls, and he traveled around the world. And it's like a rodeo ring. They did trick riding and sharpshooting and all kinds of stuff. And that stuff that was still touring the world until about 1920.
All right, Walter, final words.
Well, please go to our website here at www.y435.org. Check out the Declaration of Representation. Sign it. Join up. You know, we've got a couple college groups that are starting across the country. We'd love to have you or your friends start another chapter. We are looking for volunteers across the state to engage with the community. You know, my definition of representation is mutual education, two-way education, and I would add, you know, you have to add action into the education word, right? You have to think of it that way, and you know, we need people who want to learn and who want to educate, and we would love to have you join our ranks. And you know, please reach out. You can find me at y435.org, and you can find us on X. You can find us on YouTube. Send me an email. Whatever makes sense for you. Don't be shy. We need bold folks in this trying time, and we appreciate your engagement and look forward to connecting with you.
Scott, final words.
Well, I have nothing to advertise on my behalf. All I want to say is it's always a pleasure to talk to you nice folk. To the listener, if it wasn't for Jeff, I would not know much about. I wouldn't know anything about No Cap Fund. The issue of representation in the House would not be an issue I think about much. Thanks to Jeff and Walter and Roger and the nice folks that focus on this. It is something that comes to mind. Keep up the good work. And hopefully you guys get this moving off the ground.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah. So thank you, Scott, for coming on the show. I do appreciate it. And for the listeners out there, as Walter said, go to our website, www.y435.org. You can sign up to volunteer. You can make a donation. And you can sign our declaration. So
Yes.
until next
Thank
week.
you, Scott. I actually went out and looked you up on it. I'd never read anything on X of yours before. And so I went and looked at some of your stuff today. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspectives.
Thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
All right. Peace and love.
And representation.
Scott, I'm going to hit stop and just hang on. Okay.